Welcome to the Enabling Change Through Digital Transformation presentation. My name is Mike Fairbotham. I'm a fellow of the SIPS organisation, and I've been asked to present this on behalf of YPO for the World of Procurement event. Unfortunately, this session was cancelled due to the travel chaos, so I'm presenting it via webinar. I want to start by just talking a little bit about myself and who I am. So I work for a company called Paragean, and I'm a procurement advisor, coach, mentor, do work for SIPS, NHS Skills Development Network, and speak at various events such as World of Procurement. Some of you may have seen me speak at last year's World of Procurement event. I'm an active member on LinkedIn, so if anyone wants to link with me or my emails on the presentation, if anybody wants to have a conversation afterwards. So let's talk a little bit about digital and what digital is. So my definitions of digital start back in the early 1940s, so 1943 to 1945, with the creation of the Colossus machine at Bletchley Park by Alan Turing and Tommy Flowers. From there, after the Second World War, you have the development of semiconductor material, and then the fast forwarding to the 1970s and 1980s, the introduction of personal computers like the Altair in 1974, and my personal favourite, the ZX Spectrum in 1982. I was very lucky. My father was an early adopter of technology, and we had one of these almost as the day after it became available to the general public. And I think that's when my digital journey kind of started. Fast forward a few years, we're going to talk a little bit about the internet and the Cold War roots of the internet in ARPANET and the 1960s, and then the internet as we kind of know it today. And obviously, kind of you have that kind of connected technology, but realistically, what we're talking about with the internet now is kind of connectivity of anything to anything. So kind of mobile phones, I'm sure you all have them. Smartphones are using that kind of language. The Internet of Things, everything connected to everything else, and obviously the advent of 5G. And if you believe what people are saying about that, how that's going to transform our lives. In a business context, driving efficiencies is really what digital is all about. Doing more with less and kind of trying to drive that sort of commercial benefit. The internet and the connectivity gives us an opportunity to kind of work together in collaboration. And you'll probably read a lot and hear a lot on webinars like this one about artificial intelligence, machine learning, and the risk of our robot overlords taking over the world, or taking our jobs away at the very least. And I feel that we will see a lot of that, particularly in the procurement space, in terms of what AI can add. But I think what we all need to think about is actually digital is only part of the picture. And it's about what it can actually bring to the party. I read something fairly recently that suggested that 1 in 5 NHS trusts has already deployed AI to some extent to support patient services, which is quite a significant amount. So this thing is here now, and this digital journey is kind of continuing. So let's talk about some digital transformation examples. Digital transformation is a key enabler to change, and it's something that you won't be able to get away from these days. I've spent much of my career in the public sector buying technology in one form or another, and digital covers so many different categories of spend and huge transformations that can be achieved if it's procured professionally. The first example of this I want to talk about briefly is the idea of a hotel booking system. Now, I'm sure this is something that you've all come across. Hotel booking systems that are done electronically gives end users control and choice, but without sacrificing potential benefits of everybody buying differently. Fundamentally, people like choice and people like control. People don't like being treated like children. And in terms of being a procurement professional, what I want to do is want to make sure that I'm getting the best possible deal from each of the hotels that I'm dealing with, aggregating spend wherever possible and forcing these things through a portal. So you get savings due to aggregation of spend, you get savings due to transactional time, and fundamentally, if you do it properly, you end up with your end users still having an element of choice, which is fundamentally what people want. They don't want to be told, you're just staying in this hotel, that's that. And digital transformation enables those kind of changes. The second thing I want to talk about is the digital ambulance. So those of you who may have come across me before know that I worked as a procurement director at Yorkshire Ambulance for the last 4 years. And one of the things that we were looking at there was about how you actually move the 999 side of things forward and how much technology you can put on that ambulance and connect it to other things. A very simple, badly drawn diagram here on the screen, but effectively you've got kind of like what I would describe as a Wi-Fi hotspot on every ambulance, which can connect it to mobile devices, medical technology, and also to A&Es, urgent care centres, etc., etc. It takes me back to the late 1990s when I worked out in the private sector, and I was doing some work with a company that was working in Sweden, and what they were doing is they were doing live patient data transfers of patients who were having heart attacks from the back of an ambulance all the way through to the hospital, to the hospital where they were going to be treated. The idea being that they were diagnosed before they actually got in front of the hospital-based clinician. This is back in the 1990s, and we are now 2019, so this is 20 plus years later, and this still isn't commonplace, but it's started to go. That was one ambulance in one country. This is now technology that's going to spread across the whole 999 fleet. So it's something that's really quite exciting, and a massive kind of transformation that can be kind of achieved through that. A final point that I want to talk in a bit more detail on is this idea of a cloud-based contact center. Now, people throw around the word cloud quite a lot, and I'm by nowhere near a cloud expert. I'm not a kind of technical wizard. I'm interested in these kind of things. So if we were doing this face to face, you might want to barrage me with questions that I wouldn't be able to answer. But I do know a little bit about this kind of particular area. And one of the examples I want to talk about is this idea of a cloud-based contact center. And you all deal with contact centers, I'm sure. We all ring up when our internet fails, or when our kind of gas bill needs paying, or whatever it may be, or when you have problems with your mobile phone. And really what you've got is usually your first port of call will be telephone support. And whilst telephone support is good and we all like kind of speaking to people, actually you're encouraged away from this. The primary reason being that people cost money. Places, seats in contact centre all have overheads, and actually there's cash there, but also you're having consistencies. People answer questions in different ways, and although these things are scripted, actually you're always going to have a kind of an element of kind of personal kind of choice with what that individual contact center says to you. So email is usually available. You have the opportunity to contact a contact center via email, but because of the delayed response time, effectively that's not a very good kind of customer service, and potentially these things just go into a pot and get answered when people have a chance to. So not a great experience either side, and often if people have questions that they need to go back and ask, then again there's a time lag for this. What you'll see a lot these days, and you probably all use these to one extent or another, is the idea of web chats. And web chats can be semi-automated, scripted with a kind of drag and drop where the call center person will have on the screen kind of very standard scripted responses that can just pull and drop into your window. And also they can have one-to-many conversations. So effectively one person might be dealing with 3 kind of customers, 5 customers at the same time. And I have personal experience fairly recently with a contact center where halfway through the conversation, the tone of the person changed and they started answering a very different question to the one that they'd been asked. And the reason was that they got confused which chat window he was talking in and was answering a different question to mine, to a different customer. So you can see where these things aren't absolutely perfect, but they do kind of work. And the big thing is you can make huge pound savings in overheads and efficiencies. Now I've had companies who work in this area suggest to me that you can make a 30% saving compared to your previous spend on your contact center by moving to a web chat-based model. Now I'm not absolutely convinced you can make a 30% hard saving on everything, but I would say that there are significant savings to be had there. And obviously, when you get into the space of kind of chatbots and things like that, and truly fully automated call centers, then actually then you can make massive savings. Another point I want to make about this kind of example is the idea of cloud-based rather than on-premise solutions. So you have an increased resilience by having a kind of a virtual cloud-based kind of contact center. And in terms of business continuity, you don't end up in the position where you've got kind of like your basement gets flooded and all your servers are end up underwater, and therefore you lose that kind of ability for your customers to speak to you. But what you do have is your ability to actually kind of contact people effectively from anywhere. And in terms of ramping up, because this is a virtual center, a lot of your agents might work in their own homes. They might dial in separately. And actually, what would happen if you had a surge in capacity required due to seasonal demand, or let's say if it was a government call centre at certain times in the financial year, dealing with tax and things like that, fundamentally, you'll be able to ramp up the resources as you need to just by bringing more people online without having to open a whole new room or a whole new contact centre just to deal with 1 month's peak demand. Hopefully that all makes sense. What that is trying to bring is an enhanced customer experience. Now, the reason I put this in a slightly different colour is I think you may want to kind of put a question mark after that as well, because I think maybe a generational thing, maybe a demographic thing, but some people would actually still prefer to speak to an individual rather than speaking to a machine or typing something in. Equally, you might prefer just to kind of do a web chat because you don't want to speak to somebody in one of these kind of contact centre places. So I would say enhanced customer experience, in theory, yes. Maybe not so much in reality, but this is something that will grow and improve as time goes on. So how do we transform? Well, fundamentally, transformation is about people. We've talked about digital, but you can't get away from the people element. And we're all human. People get scared, tired, angry, grumpy, maybe, possibly. What you don't want to end up with is a lot of grumpy cats. People who are not above with change don't make rational decisions. No matter how inspirational your digital project is, if you neglect people side of change management, you see these grumpy cats start to multiply and they grow, and before you know it, you're surrounded by grumpy cats. And actually, what you end up with is you end up with people either blocking the change or just doing nothing or sitting on the fence or even worse, sabotaging. People will get in the way, people will stop the adoption of your digital service. And suddenly all of those huge benefits which you were in your original business case vanish overnight. And that business change thing kind of is so important. I cannot stress that fundamentally the digital is one element, the people is another element, and you kind of got to bring the two things together. For younger generations who are very kind of savvy with mobile phones and smartphones and the internet and things like that, will generally speaking be more adapted to those kind of changes and will feel more comfortable with it. If you have an older workforce, if your stakeholder demographic, the end users of your service tend to be on the older end of the age spectrum, then you're probably going to have a different challenge in terms of getting these people on board. So, world of procurement is all about procurement. So how do we actually buy this stuff? And what I'd like to take this back to is something fairly simple, and those procurement professionals amongst you will know this message already. This is all about the specification. What are you trying to achieve? How good is the data set? What assumptions has been made? Is it something where you can kind of articulate your need onto one side of A4 paper? Maybe articulate it in one sentence? Can you actually describe what you need? Not what's flashy, not what's new, not talking about cloud and the buzzwords. What do you actually want to achieve? What do you need to achieve? And then in terms of public sector, how are you going to prove value for money? How are you going to stay legal within Public Contract Regulations 2015? These are big questions and things that you can't kind of sidestep. And whilst digital is often seen as the cure for all ills, these things come at a price. There won't be a cheap digital solution. There will be some kind of investment needed to actually get these things going. And for me, technology is difficult to understand. Like I say, I've worked with technology all through my life, from my ZX Spectrum in the early 1980s, all the way through to today, and iPhones and iWatches and etc. etc. But realistically, when you're buying something, it can be a little bit harder, and you have to watch out for kind of gaps in misunderstandings. And for me, I always come back to this great sketch, a bit of classic British comedy. Are you buying 4 candles or are you buying 4 candles? Really quite simple stuff. If nobody's actually seen that sketch, or if somebody hasn't seen that sketch, please go watch it. Plenty of things on YouTube about it. But for me, there's not many jokes in procurement. But for me, this is the simplest buying situation. You have 2 people, they're face to face, one buyer, one seller, yet still there's total miscommunication over what the individual wants to buy. So if you imagine this is happening with 4 candles and 4 candles, what kind of risk are you carrying when you go out to market for your virtual cloud-based contact center, which even you can't really describe what it does or what it needs to do concisely? That's why getting that specification and being able to articulate it in a very, very short form is so important. So that brings us to the end of this presentation. That was enabling change through digital transformation. I hope you found it useful. As I mentioned before, digital isn't always a silver bullet that we might desire it to be. Technical solutions are often very complex, very, very much beyond our own understandings. Multi-tiered supply chains are involved, and customer requirements can be extremely hazy. However, if you take the time to understand digital transformation and then you actually work with your people to embed that transformation, then you've got a really good chance of getting an excellent procurement outcome. Thank you for listening.